Good evening, everybody. This is Shirish Netke from SAMA, and welcome to our Smart Analytics webinar series today. We've got a very exciting program today talking about big data in real life. I'm sure you would have heard a lot about big data for now, where big data is solving a lot of problems, everything from curing cancer to solving the environment, to solving global warming and all that kind of stuff. But in reality, we wanted to focus in on some really practical solutions or practical applications to big data. And in order to do that, I have a couple of people here with me who are sort of experts in the area who've been working on data analytics for a very, very long time, and even before the term big data was coined. And I look forward to having them talk to you about their experiences and how they're applying big data in real life. Now, just a couple of introductions here. We've got, and I'll be introducing them more specifically later on. We have Claude Curé from Mixology. Claude joins us from Quebec, up in Montreal in Quebec. Claude, you there?
Yep. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, Claude is up in Canada. He lives very close to Santa Claus, so I think you can say hi to Santa Claus for the rest of us from here. From
it's
the
snowing
other
right
now. In California, we have Mark Davis, the founder and CTO of Katenga. Mark, are you there?
I am. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody.
Great, great. And Mark is up in California, and I'm Shirish Netke. I'm joining you from New York, also from SAMA. Just a couple of administrative issues. There is a Twitter handle for the discussion. It's called #BigDataTalk, and so feel free to put in your tweets on there, and there'll be some other folks tweeting on it as well. Actually, a couple of things before we actually begin, and here's the agenda for the webinar today. We're going to talk about, we're going to focus this discussion very specifically on real-life examples. And while we have a variety of examples here, there are some areas we thought were more important than others when it comes to big data and the kind of questions people are dealing with. So we have an example here on public relations and consumer brands, where we'll see how consumer product companies are actually using big data and social networks, or what we call influence graphs, to figure out how a product is or a brand is doing. And this will be done using search and analytics of social graphs. You'll see some examples of that. And we also have a sort of another unique study, which is kind of completely different, on managing corporate intellectual property. So on the one hand, we have consumer brands. On the other hand, we have intellectual property. That's kind of a lot of variety right there in terms of how big data could be used. Again, we will have time for questions at the end. So if you have questions, just jot them down, and there'll be a process at the end for you to ask questions. So for the way it would be done is there'll be on your console, there's a place you can raise your hand, or you can put in the chat window. Either way, we'll answer your questions towards the end of the webinar. Now, moving right ahead, just to put stuff in perspective here, some of you may have seen this. This is from the McKinsey report of about a year ago, where they talked about the increase in the flow of data and how it's going to have an impact on the world, and all that stuff I talked about global warming and world hunger I was joking about. But essentially, what a lot of big data allows you to do is it allows you to address problems which were not addressable before, or problems which people thought could not be solved before. One example people talk about is about human genome sequencing. I guess it took us billions of dollars and years of computing to be able to solve the human genome problem, or to sequence the human genome. And what folks who are the proponents of Hadoop are saying is that it could be done in $500,000 in just a few months, because of the availability of new technology nowadays. Now, that you can talk to the Hadoop guys about that claim and how it can be done, but suffices to say that there are new things possible right now which were not possible before, and that's sort of the context in which I'd like to take this discussion. Now, before we go into that, I just want to give you a little bit of perspective of where we are coming from as SAMA, what sort of are your sponsors for this event today. SAMA manages the data lifecycle of an enterprise to transform complex data into valuable information that directly impacts business critical decisions. Now, this is kind of the essence of what SAMA does and has been doing for the last 15 years or so. The only difference is that 15 years ago, we didn't have large amounts of data. We had what was called traditional data from enterprises, from ERP systems, which then went on to the data warehouses. And we've been doing that for many years. And more recently, SAMA talks about something called SAMA Sixth Sense. Sixth Sense essentially incorporates the legacy environment of structured data along with syndicated data, which is much larger in size than what's generated from inside of an enterprise, and combined further with unstructured data to create value-added analytic solutions which help in decision making. So much for the discussion on what we do. I'd like to sort of turn the conversation over to a quick poll that we want to do right now. If we have Durga, if you can put a poll, we'd like to have a poll for the audience right now, just to see, get an idea of the profile, who's on and who's talking right now. So, Durga, can you put on the poll questions? Okay, are we having some difficulties with the polling?
I'm seeing it.
No, it's going on.
Okay. All right, so Durga, can you see the polling questions? Okay. I'll tell you what, if we can read out the poll questions, can everybody see it? Claude and Mark, can you see those questions?
Yeah, I can see them.
Yes, Sharice.
Great. I'd like to see what the result is. Durga, can you read out the answers to the questions that we got so far? Okay. I'll tell you what. Let's move on to the organized speak. We'll get to the answers of the questions later on. Okay. First of all, we'll get to the polling questions right at the end of the call. Let me get back to our speakers here. Claude is our first speaker. Claude has got a very interesting background. He is an astrophysicist and a scientist and a PhD in a lot of different subjects, which he'll tell you about. But what's kind of interesting is, Claude, can you tell us a little bit about your background? I think there's so much to say, which I really can't cover in these few words that I've got on the slide here. Could you tell us what you do and what in the world are you doing with data analytics?
So to basically, I only have a PhD in one subject. So
okay.
And that's I have a PhD in high energy astrophysics. So anybody when people work with big data, basically in 1990s, at places like CERN, they were producing terabytes of data almost daily. And so almost everybody who's worked in either big astronomy projects or big, what we call high energy particle physics, where these particle colliders are, either in Fermilab or at CERN or at SLAC, there are people there who have had to handle big data before people called it big data. So that was me a long time ago, and then I basically started, and still in my academic career, I went from being the founder of the astronomy department at McGill, published twice in Nature on astrophysics, to starting to work in sociology, where we applied some of the big kind of signal-to-noise reduction techniques to start trying to figure out how people collaborate. Mostly back then on scientific publications. And then about 2005, I just had the idea to say, well, people are leaving written traces of their interactions, and we can do a lot of interesting, well, sociology, anthropology, but also mostly just social dynamics by looking at these traces that people leave in social interactions on social media. And, you know, we were doing that in 2005. And so now, while the social media industry is exploding, and we were well positioned to actually be able to describe mathematically the interactions that are happening with unstructured text. So that's about the 5-minute description of what I do here at Mixology.
So there is a connection between astrophysics and big data and sociology.
Absolutely, because right now the amount of social data that people are creating is doubling every 1.5 years.
Wow. Okay. So Claude, I'm going to hand you over the presentation thing so you can speak. You can show them your pictures and what you got going on your screen.
Sure. So, I'm going to assume that I saw that most of the people here are from an IT background, so it's very useful to know who we're speaking to. What you're looking at here is a consumer products / PR example of how we basically approach the analysis of unstructured text data. And what you're seeing here is that it's basically a network map. People have different words for this, but you know, we have to calculate centrality and in between this to be able to get a graph like this. Centrality is a pretty complex measure to calculate because you have to understand the number of calculations you have to do to get centrality and to get these type of figures. Scales with the combinatorics, which is basically scales with faster than exponentials. So we're looking here at a relatively small data set. And what we do is that we can scrape blogs. So we often work in the hundreds of thousands of blogs. This is a smaller data set. And what we were looking at is a new type of drink category, which is basically the anti-energy drink, or what we call relaxation drinks, so different words like that. But they're basically drinks that calm you down instead of speed you up.
Right. I'm assuming all these are legal drinks, right?
Well, strangely enough, some of them are legal, but they have the roots in something that is illegal, and we'll see that.
Okay.
We'll see how data, purely data, nothing else here, can, without reading one blog, because you know we would have thousands of blogs to read here, and that's too much to do for humans. We could be able to get insights out from this with this kind of analysis technique. So what we did is that we scraped all the blogs that existed on certain keywords. We took some brands, like some of these brands are called Slow Cow, Malava Relax, Vacation in a Bottle. They have really cool names, right? Malava Novocaine, okay? And then we cross this because it's such a new field of drinks that some people call these kava drinks, some people call these calming drinks, some people call these anti-energy drinks, and other people call this relaxation drinks, okay? And the orange dots,
anti-energy, like as
anti-energy right here, yeah.
Okay.
And then relaxation drink is over here. I'm highlighting it as I'm passing over it. And so we combine brands, existing brands like Soul Cow and Vacation in the Bottle, with denominations of this new market. And what we see is that the two denominations that are called calming drink really has its own world. That the people who, the blue spots are bloggers, and we see some pretty prominent blogs in there. Like we'll see Boing Boing is in there, Crunch Gear.
Okay.
You know, so some of the blogs are rather important.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an organization of who said what. And we see that the people who talk about calming drink are really in their own community. okay? And there's very few people who talk about calming drinks and talk about relaxation and anti-energy drink. But the same people who talk about anti-energy drink also talk about relaxation drink. You see here?
Okay. Wow.
So in these 2 points, so what we do is that we calculate, if you want co-frequency, we have other ways of doing it, and then we scale that on this graph with proximity. So it's actually very close to molecular modeling software, where these would be the charges between 2 different atoms. And then over here we have a completely distinct kava drink discussion, okay? Mm-hmm. And we can see by the people who are speaking about kava drink that for them it's really nature-oriented. It's herbalist, herbal remedies, right? Science-based medicine. So this is a graph of who's saying what, and it gives you the structure of the discussion right away. This is what we call an interest graph. So this is, what we do here is it's a pretty complex process where we take the text, we do some very simple NLP, we take out all the conjunctions and connecting words, and then we do a lemmatization, which is a way of saying finding the root word or the root concept from a bunch of words, like ran, running, run, we will group into run, and then we'll do another level where we say, okay, how is this used in a sentence, and we determine the difference between going for a run, which is the noun, and the verb to run. And so, and then we look at how all these concepts interact together, right? And so the size of the concept is directly proportional to the size of the node, how important the concept is, and how related it is to other concepts is where it is in the graph. So what I want to bring your attention to is that this is a graph, a visual representation of, we often do it in hundreds of thousands of discussions in one graph. So what are we seeing here in the anti-energy drink discussion? We see the anti-energy is right at the middle of the graph, right? But look over here. We have the word hip, hop, right?
There are 2 different words, or is that one word?
It's sometimes regrouped. In this case, it should be regrouped as one, but it's one concept, hip hop. We see the word Los Angeles, and I'm highlighting these concepts, and I'm going to zoom in. Right? We see the word Houston, and then we see the word marijuana, and now we see the word weed. So what we're seeing here is a cluster of concepts. And you can see now very clearly that this is not part of the central discussion, right? But if you're going to do in the marketing of energy drinks, this is something that without us putting any keywords around hip-hop, it'll emerge as, wow, there's a whole bunch of people who drink hip-hop, who drink these anti-energy drinks, who are also into Southern hip-hop, right? And when you look into the reason why, you see here we have the word syrup.
Syrup,
right?
Okay, yeah.
Is that word
Next to
syrup?
marketing.
No, it's connected to purple. And what happens is that in the southern U.S., because the drinking ages are so high, like 21, people, instead of drinking alcohol, will mix cough syrup with Diet Sprite or Sprite, and they'll drink that instead. And there's a whole hip-hop movement around this.
All right, that's kind of information, extra information that we
didn't
have before, but okay.
It's stuff that completely comes out from the data alone, no human analysis here. We haven't read one blog.
All right.
And so if you're going to market this, if you're going to enter this market, it's really important to know that a huge demographic in the U.S. is already doing it, and that demographic likes hip-hop, and you should market to those people. Or not market to these people. If you don't know this, you could be making huge mistakes.
So what have you just done? You've just identified a market segment for a new kind of drink. Is that what it means in simple terms?
Absolutely.
For a simple marketing guy?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
And so what we've built as well is something that will analyze weaker signals. So, of course, you can see the network evolve here as I'm picking the concepts and moving down, right? But we can pick a bunch of concepts, and one of the things that we do in signal-to-noise detection is that we all know that the key words, like I put in slow cow, and you see the word bull from Red Bull popping up. But if I want to look at the emerging discussions, I can move down the chain of concepts and look at the least important concepts, and here we go. We see that there's a Canadian node up here. That's, strangely enough, the word beer is close to that.
Beer and Canada go together. How about that?
Oh, yeah, we're big beer drinkers here. And then we have the hip-hop node that I was talking about that's emerging very clearly.
And that's in Los Angeles.
That's in Los Angeles. And so this is how literally people would do signal-to-noise reduction.
Wow, very interesting.
There you
go. So again, if I've understood this right, Claude, is for a marketeer, he's basically taken a huge amount of unstructured data which comes out of blogs and whatever.
Twitter,
and
Facebook.
Twitter feeds or whatever, and try to make sense out of it and actually create a market segmentation strategy. Is that what you're saying here?
That's easily done literally in a day with this kind of software.
And it's something which could not be done before without doing a sort of an analysis of structured data. So you have found needles and haystacks here.
That's the point of our software. That's literally what we've designed this to do.
Okay, great. So as a marketeer, I mean, how does one actually go about this? You start with blogs, you start with Twitter feeds. Where do you get all this data from?
Well, we do blogs, data, Facebook. We do Twitter, of course. And we take any kind of social data. So we will take anything that's, for instance, crash ticket data. The Canadian military has hired us to look at WikiLeaks data. So we can put anything that's written by a human with unstructured text into our system. So if you think we could also work on employee surveys, any kind of open-ended text from a phone survey, we can analyze with this.
That's very interesting. So while you're sort of pulling up the other projects here, I think one of the questions people would be very interested in is that people have this notion that in order to implement a unstructured analytics project, it requires a lot of infrastructure, a lot of time and effort to sort of pull it together. And it's kind of something which takes a lot of infrastructure too. Could you give a sort of sense of, take any project, or give a sense of from start to finish, like today I want to start doing doing something practical with data from my blogs and from my Twitter feeds. How long would it take for me from start to finish to get these kind of insights that you're talking about?
Depending with what software you're using. With us, we could go, like the example I'm going to show you now is actually, it's about one of the major petroleum company that wanted to understand risks to its share price. And so this is a completely different problem. It's also PR related, but what happens is that today, traders, so energy traders, metals traders, rely on blog and social media data to be able to either have the extra information to short companies on the stock market. So what used to have to go through newspapers, it was a long filter. So if there was something that could hurt your company, let's say on the exploitation side of an oil company, and if let's just say that a country might be nationalizing its oil resources, in the old days I had to get a newspaper and then the traders would find out about it. Today, what's happening is that people on the site, before it even becomes an issue, blog or tweet about it. And we'll mention various company names, and then people on Wall Street and NASDAQ constantly monitor those company names to look for negative things to be able to trade, to bet against them. And so what we see here is that, we see there's one company that had a risk matrix, and they're very worried that some of these risks might get out and that people would short them. And we see, we look here at some of these risk matrix. So we have, there's people who work in the tar sands, and there's almost every oil company in the world is in the tar sands now, in the oil sands. And so, the oil sands are in Fort McMurray. There's also oil in Libya, and then there's all kinds of Aboriginal issues, human rights issues, and they have this company had people in Trinidad, and then of course biodiversity, and we're doing the same thing before. These were all keywords for which we got data, and then you see stuff like Oil Sands Truth shut down the tar sands. These are people. Royal Dutch Shell is actually they took the company name and blog against Royal Dutch. Tar Sands Watch, same thing. These were a lot of anti-tar sands people, but at the same time, there's also pro-tar sands people here, like the Business Insider. Mm-hmm. The biggest, so again, the blue nodes are blogs, and the orange nodes are keyword sets, like climate change. And we see right in the middle, the biggest issue is very tightly linked to climate change is water. And so,
does water and change go together?
Well, water, because it takes a lot. It takes 5 barrels of water to produce 1 barrel of tar sand oil.
Okay.
And so we see here there's a blog called the Oil Drum, and we can drill down straight to the blogs with the system. And this blog is a prolific publisher. Okay. And basically, what's happening is that the Oil Drum is a site dedicated to providing information to energy traders. So in the old days when, maybe you had Greenpeace who would make noise and Greenpeace had to do a demonstration and maybe you would get into the papers, well, Greenpeace are talking directly to the people who buy and sell oil.
Wow.
And so they can hurt your share price very quickly. Mm-hmm. By in social media going around the normal media venues. And this is literally what's happening here.
So then again, if you look at it from an application, what do we do with this data? How do we make our lives better by analyzing this?
Well, we can actually, what we do is that if we go and we look at their basic risk profile, we can actually calculate what's being said. So now you're looking at a data set that is over 14,000 blogs in one graph. What you're seeing here is a summary of what was said on 14,000 blogs. Mm-hmm. And we see the water issue right here very clearly, right?
Yep.
We see that there's all kinds of expansion issues over here emerging. And that's because there's so much oil in the tar sands, tons of companies are still expanding. And then we see, people are discussing it at the same time they're talking about gold futures. Right?
Okay.
But look at that. We have the word human rights here. That's just starting to emerge. And nation. Right. And so what we're seeing over here is that First Nations are starting to maybe move against these oil companies.
Very interesting.
And that is a major, major issue that could really affect the stock price in the long term. So that's a kind of insights that go straight to the board, right? This is very, very strategic, and for instance, these companies won't necessarily see or even include these keywords in their risk matrix.
Right.
And we can, in the consumer side, for instance, we identified new markets with social media data. Here we can actually identify new potential liabilities and risks.
Okay. Oh, this is fascinating. You never thought that you could use blogs to figure out so much insights in such a short period of time. Again, going back to the earlier question, how long does it take from soup to nuts, from beginning to end, to do this whole thing? Is it a matter of weeks,
this
days,
project, full time would be days.
Days, okay.
And the converse though, mm-hmm. How many people would it take to read 14,000 blogs?
Okay.
That's what we have to ask.
So that's the other option.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, Claude, thank you very much. I think there'll be a bunch of questions towards the end, which I'm sure people have. And I'm going to transfer the presentation over to Mark. Can everybody see Mark's picture there? All right, hold on one second. We're having some technical difficulty here.
Shirish, you want to do my intro slide first?
Yes, I'm going to do your intro slide first. Did you see the slides now?
Not yet.
Okay, just give me 1 second here. Let me transition over to Mark as a speaker, and yeah. For those of you who can see my slides now, we've got Mark Davis is our next speaker. Mark is the founder and CTO of Katenga, a startup company here in the Valley. And I'll let Mark sort of describe his background. Mark has kind of approached this from a few different ways and has been working in data analytics for a very large number of years and has published a lot of papers on the subject. So, Mark, I'm going to let you describe your background and how you came about to talking about big data, because I'm sure big data wasn't around 15 or 20 years ago when you were doing a lot of other things. If you could just explain your journey from the time of about the last 10, 15 years to where we are right now, that will give the audience a perspective of where we're coming from.
Sure. Thank you, Shirish. And you'll see in what I'm going to describe in a few minutes some similarities as well as some differences with what Claude was showing here. But my background was actually kind of serendipitous. I was hired in 1992 to work on projects on what we now call big data, as it turns out. And at the time, information retrieval, search, and big data were only of interest to a few people, librarians and spies, as it turns out. And so we worked primarily for the spies, but sometimes for librarians. And this was on topics like how do you index and efficiently retrieve enormous amounts of information. And the intellectual legacy of all that work actually you can see in modern search engines, where the ranking algorithms that are used by Google and so forth all came out of that era, and from those same research projects, as well as a lot of the computational linguistics and natural language processing technologies. I also worked I was one of the original members of the SharePoint team at Microsoft and worked on SharePoint, which was at that time called Tahoe, but later became the SharePoint product. And then I migrated to Xerox Palo Alto Research Center and helped spin a company called Insight out of there, which specialized in a combination of visualization and computational linguistics. But one thing that we kept encountering was big data problems, and we didn't use the term at the time, but when you're talking about millions to billions of documents, when you're talking about millions to billions of messages, and you want to be able to make sense of them, just like Claude's technology demonstrates a way of looking at relationships, semantic relationships expressed within this data. How can you do that? And that's where because we saw these problems over and over again, we formed Katenga in 2009, and we received funding again from the U.S. intelligence communities to be able to work on that. And so with that, maybe we can go to the demo.
Yeah, sure. So Mark, I'm going to start the presentation over to you now.
Okay.
Go right ahead, Mark.
And I'll just follow not sure what's going on here. One moment.
Okay. So while Mark is pulling up his presentation on his screen, one of the things which we often get asked is what is the practical application of big data, and I hope Claude's earlier examples were indicative of what is possible. I think what Mark is going to talk about a little bit more in detail is about how, I guess I don't know if he's going to talk about the government but about how corporations are going to be using or are using the same big data solutions to come up with ways of tackling real world business problems. And if you've got, and once we go through this, we will have have questions at the end. But in the meanwhile, keep your questions and feel free to send them on chat, and we'll be monitoring those for people to look at later on. Mark, are you ready to go?
I believe I am.
Okay, great.
So let me just give a little background on this. So Katenga emerged from this desire to be able to do versatile things associated with especially unstructured information. And the reason for that is because big data is not just transactional data. In fact, most organizations have transactional data. The transactional data is relatively small, and it's only over a long periods of time that it even becomes big. And so this notion that unstructured information as part of the multiple ways of viewing big data, whether it's through volume, velocity, or in our case, especially associated with variety, but being able to do that with the volume part of the equation and let people do ad hoc interactivity with big data and to create their own solutions. And so let me just go to a direct demo and show you what we do. So this is our Katenga Analytics platform, and it is a device, an authoring tool for creating big data solutions, but not an IDE, not a programming environment, but a drag and drop environment similar to a visual ETL, where you can create different types of analytical workflows that operate over big data resources to be able to do different tasks. If you need to crawl a remote resource, if you need to extract from that resource people, places, organizations, the relationships that are expressed within the data, if you need to extract biological entities like for researchers, like protein names and things of that nature, if you need to create a social network graph, all of these tools are available and can be sequenced together in different ways, and the data can be joined together. And all of these workflows then flow and operate over Hadoop. So they all scale up by scaling out. Once you've pulled this together, and I've kind of made a hash of this one by dragging and dropping a whole bunch of stuff together. But once you've pulled and created these kinds of workflows, you can then very easily launch these to operate over the Hadoop infrastructure. And so you simply say run, and the workflow goes off and operates over Hadoop. And you can monitor the jobs as they're flowing over Hadoop from within this same environment. As the jobs start, monitor your individual nodes. You can interact with the Hadoop environment to upload and download data directly from your Hadoop infrastructure and from your file system to look at the data in different ways. And then ultimately, when you get results out of your job, the question is, how do you make use of those? How do you visualize that data? And so we want to support the ability to have an ad hoc interaction with the data, and then ultimately also to make all of the data searchable. And I'll show you how the search component works in a minute. But just to begin with, we have the ability to bind these different analytic tools, whether they're simple charting tools, more sophisticated information analysis visualizations, and geospatial analysis, and then partner companies with traditional BI type solutions. So we can look at the data in different ways. Here we've extracted biological terminology directly from text, and we've projected it into a pie chart, pulling that data directly from our Hadoop system and pivoting it kind of the way that we're used to working with Excel spreadsheets. In fact, we can even export that to the same data to Excel. If this isn't the right way of viewing this data, however, we can project that data into a different visualization. So here we have a heat map or a tree map that shows these different terms. And this one is particularly relevant. This, as it turns out, is about mad cow disease, which was recently in the news. So we can see taking bunch of biological documents about mad cow disease, we can see the major proteins that are being discussed within that, and this can be extremely useful for a researcher.
So now again, Mark, you've got mad cow disease being depicted based on its priority or how often it occurs. What do we do with this data? How do you use this?
So one of the key usages of this sort of technology from an R&D perspective is for researchers who are entering new areas of exploration that they're not familiar with, and so suddenly you need to assign a research team to look at mad cow disease and look at opportunities there in a large pharma company. How do they assess the entire landscape of what is being talked about, the different research topics that are being discussed? And with a tool like this, you have the ability to do an ad hoc investigation of that and see whether it leads you anywhere in terms of finding outliers or areas of that need special emphasis.
Okay.
In addition, we can pull using our social network analysis capabilities and other tools that we have available to us. We can do things like do large-scale social network analysis. So here we've taken thousands of documents that we crawled, we scraped off the web using this tool, and we're looking at, we're projecting all of the people, places, and organizations around the outside of a ring with the intention of being able to investigate further. And we can zoom in and look at relationships, and these relationships are given by the relative magnitudes of them. And so we can zoom in and examine from that data what relationships are expressed. Here we have Bill Clinton related to the Treasury and the Democratic Party and Wall Street. And that was found within a single context, which is generally a paragraph, but can be varied. And so you can go after, with these kinds of visualization tools, large data relationships that are latent within the data to be able to look at it and see what the relationship structure is. But you can also see here that there are locations expressed in there. So what if I wanted to look at the locations and what their distribution is geospatially? So here now we have geospatial viewer capability that supports 9 separate mapping solutions, both internal and external. And we can look at that data in different ways projected onto these mapping resources to be able to get a visual representation of it. Moreover, all of the locations have been automatically converted into latitudes and longitudes in order to support this capability. And so we out of the box have the capacity to do that sort of what's called geospatial name resolution directly from within this environment.
So you can actually figure out what the geospatial location is from the blog or for whatever data source it is?
That's right. Now, that's can be an ambiguous job. There's hundreds of Londons all over the United States. There are literally 1,000 Los Angeleses all over Central America. And so we have the capacity to drill down on the data, filter it by things like country codes so that you can drill in and look more carefully at any one country, as well as what's called a best mode, which uses population-based filtering to try and limit the data set along another dimension to eliminate some of these kinds of ambiguities when you're investigating it using geospatial tools.
Okay.
So all of these tools are designed to support the direct interaction on the part of an analyst with big data, and big data that is both large in terms of megabytes, large in terms of gigabytes, terabytes, large in terms of number of messages, blogs, tweets, etc., and also is varied, whether by supporting the ability to pull these relationships and entities directly out of unstructured information and also semi-structured information. So we can, for example, pull IP addresses out of log files and do one of the canonical sorts of interaction task associated with IP addresses and log files. But one of the things our customers asked us then, they said, well, how do you make then all of that data searchable so that we can interact with it using search? Because search is one of the primary ways of interacting with unstructured information. And so we recently integrated the ability to index all of this content and all this unstructured information to turn it into search solutions. And so as part of our overall analytics product, we have the ability to export the data, make it searchable, and create portals, but portals that don't just show you a ranked list of results like Google, but bind these kinds of unstructured information resources, people, locations, organizations, directly to analytic tools in a very versatile sort of way, as well as to index the analytical products that have been created out of the data to make them discoverable within an organization. So this is designed to support a new model for interacting with search within an organization in terms of enterprise search. And here we've done, this is general business information, and we've extracted people, places, organizations, and discovered relationships within them, as well as projected the dates and times onto a visual representation. Here we extracted electronic devices from crawling a competitor's website, or the website of competitors of an electronics company, so that the company personnel can now find related to the keyword cards now, which was the query here. They can find all of Dell's patents that Dell holds on their website associated with retaining cards. And
now, isn't this the kind of stuff that could be done on Google search or something, where you just put in a query and you get a whole bunch of answers there?
Yes. So you potentially can do that, assuming, number one, assuming that Google has crawled all of the websites, but then you also have to limit the websites to only the targets that are of interest to you, which can be a very complex query formulation. And then Google does not provide the ability to bind all this extracted information so that you can look at what over the 661 documents that contain card, what are the electronic devices that are expressed within there, within that data, so that you can drill down on the data in different ways and see it and see what is the relationship between cards and processors. And so here we've done a subquery to look at the relationships between different types of cards and processors. You can do this. There's actually some very interesting research that shows that the ability to form new queries is related to your verbal intelligence or a user's verbal intelligence. But if you provide these kinds of tools, then you kind of short-circuit that process, because people don't have to guess at the semantics of words in a new domain. Instead, they're able to visually see what is being expressed within all of that data that's out there and understand sort of the lay of the land, if you will. Just one more example. Here's an example actually that goes directly to the heart of the question you ask. This is the Food and Drug Administration kind of for internal use re-envisioned. Food and Drug Administration actually uses a Google search appliance to support their search, but they have no ability to look at within that analytics associated with where are drugs within the regulatory process, what are the accession numbers associated with drugs that are in this regulatory process. And so using specialized terminology associated with chemicals and drug names and accession numbers and things like that, we now have the ability to create these new search results that show what is the relationship between acetaminophen and this is hydrochlorothiazide and things of that sort, so that you can look at data in very different ways than the sort of standard ranked list approach of the data.
And how
So
would
we've
you
gone
do this
from-
traditionally? In order to do this, would you have to like gather a whole bunch of data, put it into a relational database, or put a dashboard on top of it? How would it have been done before without the use of technology?
Yeah, so there are two ways to do that. The number one, the merger of the skill set associated with combining search together with this kind of structured information, it is very hard to come by. And so, you know, in terms of some of the value we bring to the table, first off, it is that all of this is prepackaged, ready to go, and makes it very easy to get to the first base with regard to that.
Mm-hmm.
Traditional ways of getting at that data involve, number one, going through and trying to hand annotate the data with the important metadata. We've automatically extracted it here. And not always with perfection. Natural language processing isn't necessarily 100% perfect. It ranges from 90 to 95% in terms of accuracy, depending on the crispness of the ambiguities of the data. But the first step to do it traditionally would be to surface all that metadata out, to put it all into a traditional relational database that, number one, may not scale, to figure out the schema necessary to do that, and then to either use a text search capability within the database itself, which were notoriously poor, or to try and create a dashboard that mashes up the text search capabilities with the metadata that is stored in the database itself. And that can be a very slow process in terms of both making that work as well as achieving high-quality results that arrive in a timely manner.
Okay, great. So in fact, there are a bunch of questions which are coming up on the screen here, Mark. So I'm going to switch back to presenting here. So while the switching is taking place, can we? There's one question will just come up again from the audience, and that is, how much time does it take to go from like beginning to end? Like today, I decide to do this research on drugs or whatever correlation you talked about. Will it take me like months, years, days to put that together? How would I go about it?
Right. So that's exactly one of our core value propositions, is that we're reducing that kind of time from months down to a matter of a few days. And so, for example, our out of the box, our packages can get set up and have a single node of Hadoop already involved or already working with them, and you can be up and running in just a matter of minutes. We even have a virtual machine system where you can be up and running in a matter of about a minute, depending on your needs. And then, you know, the points where time is involved is identifying your data source and bringing it into the Hadoop ecosystem, or crawling it from its remote site into the Hadoop ecosystem. Creating your workflow and then running the jobs, examining the results that come out of them, drilling down on them, seeing if they're right, adjusting the parameterizations for them, and then designing, finally, the end user search experience to go from sort of the ad hoc analysis component for investigating the data over to the searchable solution. But we've done POCs. The FDA POC was proof of concept, was done in a matter of about a week, and that involved the primary issues that arose were getting access to the data, The other issue is how do you define the terminology? Where do you find the terminology that supports the unique needs of a domain, a business domain? And but a week or less is a typical cycle.
Okay, great. And actually, another question here is, and I guess this you've answered in some way because of the pharmaceutical example. But I think the more important question is, what other areas of pharmaceutical or drug discovery can the solution play a part of?
Yeah, so we have, we're in general focused initially here on managing English unstructured text about pharmaceuticals. So this can play a role in, we've had discussions concerning marketing of pharmaceuticals, where you want to try and understand your customer base and what they're talking about with regard to side effects to be able to set research priorities. Doing the basic R&D and looking at the semantics expressed within research documents as well. And then the example from the FDA is more on the regulatory side and understanding all the regulatory filings. But one thing that I'll just mention in addition to that is, amazingly enough, many large pharmaceutical corporations around the world have very limited knowledge management infrastructure in place for their regulatory filings and all of the documentation that supports them. These are typically SAS files as well as PDFs that describe the contents of the research that they conducted about the efficacy of drugs and compounds. And so we've found that we've been very surprised that they don't even have the ability to search these in many cases. And so we have the ability now to, in a scalable manner, to go after turning that all into an actionable intelligence, an actionable product that can help reduce the amount of time that it takes to figure out whether you're on the right path or not.
Okay. So here's another question from the audience for Claude. Claude, I mean, you've talked about sociology, you've talked about astrophysics and all that stuff. How have astrophysicists and sociologists actually used what you're talking about?
Oh, well, before I started the company, so first off is that we've had clients ranging from, the biggest oil companies in the world, right down to some of the biggest agencies, to leaders of government. So, we had a pitch last week in Southeast Asia with a leader of the opposition over there. So the number of people who use the type of analysis we have to very quickly resume, hundreds of thousands of individual discussions. But like Mark said, I think one of the biggest things we can do that people haven't even started thinking yet is their own internal data. Certainly in the data is oil analogy, a lot of companies are sitting on very valuable data, but it's in the crude form, and they need people like Mark and I to extract it and refine it into, a product. So in terms of sociology, though, very specifically, I published twice in sociology. Once, and I had a pending paper for Nature in sociology, basically studying 450,000 authors who published together 150,000 articles on a query that was 3.5 pages long that describes nanotechnology. So so when people want to understand how, right now, when we look at the genome revolution, which you mentioned, Sharish, what people are really, really not understanding right now is that the nanotechnology revolution is happening as we speak, and it is 15 times bigger in terms of scientific papers and patents than the genome revolution was. So there are not enough people on Earth to read all the papers that are being published right now in nanotech. And so we ran our software on that problem.
Yep. And actually, this is fascinating. I mean, you see just the breadth of subjects which both of you have covered is actually inspiring for a lot of folks. I'm sure a lot of people listening will get some more ideas of what they can do with big data. So What I'm going to ask both of you to do is any closing remarks on what you would recommend for viewers on this or for listeners on this call on what they should do. What's the first thing they should do if they're looking for a big solution to a data analytics problem, which has a lot of data in it, a lot of unstructured data in it. And Mark, I'll let you go first. Quick answer to what's the first thing you should do, and then Claude, you can answer right after that.
Yeah, well, the first thing that you should do, I think, is that what we've seen is a lot of companies are just emerging from an IT-centric understanding of big data technologies, where they're trying to figure out what Hadoop is, what all of these sort of technologies are, and how to make use of them in an IT sense. And so I think the first step is that the line of business thinkers need to look carefully at the technology and try to figure out how the technology can address business use cases. And that's where we're seeing right now, here moving into 2012 and towards late 2011, a lot more interest from the business side who says, okay, you've got Hadoop, now what are you going to do with it?
What do you do next?
Yeah, what do you do next? And so an assessment and a hard look at how the big data technologies can help and not just replace traditional technologies like BI solutions, but be able to go after unstructured information that's moving at high velocity through and is relevant to the business, I think is the critical question.
Great. So, Claude, what would you say? What advice you give to people who are listening in right now?
Well, I would say that the big data problem, I would say, because most of the companies are sitting, they're just being bombarded with this data, and if anything, it's treated as a data problem. The technology we have to address that, as Mark just said, is like Hadoop, and then some major storage capacity. But that's really just the beginning of turning that problem into money. And the next thing people need after this is either they get hire data scientists through firms like you guys, or go through a software solution like David, Mark's, or mine. But the refining of that data after you store it and retrieve it is a logical next step. And the people to do that are data scientists.
Great, great. So I think we are just about out of time for this. I'd like to thank Mark and Claude, both of you, for a most enlightening discussion on a very wide variety of topics, which we probably would not have linked to big data to begin with. But it's fascinating to see the variety of topics covered and what impact it would have. And for those of you in the audience, if you have any further questions, you can send them to this address, bigdata_questions@sama.com, and these questions can be addressed to any one of the speakers or to us, whoever, and we'll make sure you get answers to all your questions. So we're just about out of time. There will be a recording of this webinar available online later on, and you'll be able to listen to the whole thing later, and also pass it on to your friends and who are interested in big data as well. With that, I would like to conclude today's broadcast. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you again, Mark and Claude, for a most fascinating discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.